Today on Larry King Now, the acclaimed film director Jay Roach. All the way, the part it deals with is Johnson from taking over from the assassination into the first 2 years of his...
It's actually
what era?
It's actually the 11 or so months from JFK's assassination to being elected for the first time, because he was kind of, as he saw it, or as people saw it, the accidental president. Isn't wisdom a minimum basic requirement for leadership in our country? Do we think of Trump as a wise man? And that's what I look for in leaders, people who have wisdom and not ego.
Plus, I hear that there's going to be an Austin Powers 4.
You know, we talk about it every time we get together, and it ebbs and flows.
That's all next on Larry King Now. Welcome to Larry King Now. Jay Roach is an Emmy, Golden Globe, and Peabody Award-winning producer and director who's largely known for directing uproarious comedies like Meet the Fockers and the Austin Powers film franchise. However, in recent years, Jay has helmed some of the most acclaimed political docudramas in recent memory, including last year's Trumbo and 2 award-winning HBO original movies, Recount and Game Change. And now HBO has tapped him again as the director of All the Way, starring Bryan Cranston as Lyndon Johnson. The film premieres May 21st. All the Way was a major Broadway hit. Did you see it on Broadway?
Yeah, twice. Yeah.
When did you option it, I guess?
Well, Spielberg optioned it and actually brought it to HBO. I was working with Bryan on Trumbo, prepping that, and I saw the play first without knowing I would be involved in it, and then they came, HBO and Spielberg, and asked me to direct it, so I went and saw it again. It was amazing. You know, he won a Tony for it.
All the Way, the part it deals with is Johnson from taking over from the assassination into the first 2 years of his...
It's actually
what era?
It's actually the 11 or so months from JFK's assassination to being elected for the first time, because he was kind of, as he saw it, or as people saw it, the accidental president for those 11 months. And the extraordinary thing that he does in that time, instead of just sort of sitting back and accumulating power, is he chooses to take on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which in a way was a terrible idea because most of his support was in the South. And by doing so, he lost his support in the South, had to run and win anyway. And actually, it was the beginning of the current party configuration, because all the Dixiecrats, the conservatives, left the Democratic Party that year and went to the Republican Party, and the liberals in the Republican Party were sort of flushed out and went to become Democrats or independents.
Was it based on any of the many books written about Johnson?
I think it's derived from a lot of different sources.
Who's that one guy? I've interviewed him a couple of times.
Robert Caro probably is who people...
Still got one coming.
Yeah, but Doris Kearns-Gruen wrote an amazing book about Johnson. She actually consulted with us on the film.
The power of Johnson was amazing, though. I interviewed Everett Dirksen during the Civil Rights battle. Lyndon Johnson called him into the office, put his arms around him and said, "You're going to support this because it's right."
That's in our film. You'll love the scene, because it's one of those great moments that Johnson delivered the Texas twist, or the Johnson treatment, as it was called, where he would get right in your face and talk to you a couple inches away and flatter you, and then slowly start to kind of press you and make you feel like you will be ashamed if you don't get on my side of history. And he does that. He did that better than it's a lost art. I don't think people
would you
do
agree
it so well now.
No Vietnam and Johnson would be one of the greats?
I believe that's true. As we look back in time, it's very tough to see through the catastrophe and the slaughter that was Vietnam to these first couple of years. He not only passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he passed the Voting Rights Act in '65. He helped start Medicaid, Medicare, Head Start, that he doubles the education spending, infrastructure, and even things like PBS and NPR, you know, the AFI, things that I've grown to love in my life. He actually used government, contrary to what people say about government not being part of the solution, he used government and legislation to improve the quality of life of Americans. That nowadays, government's been so delegitimized, people don't even look at it that way.
You think this might help or hurt the Rob Reiner film?
I don't know. Woody's a close friend. You know,
Woody Harrelson's going to
Woody Harrelson plays him, and we spoke before he decided to do that, and he did such a great job playing Steve Schmidt in Game Change.
Yeah.
So I root for everything he does. So I hope it helps. I mean, I think any conversation about politics, especially about a man like Johnson and a man like Dr. King, who believed that you could work together to accomplish good things. You know, any film that comes out, I'm not competitive if it just is one more thing to help.
And how good is Bryan Cranston to work with?
He's amazing. I mean, I've done 2 films with him now. The soulfulness, the heart, the passion, and the craft. He's been doing it a long time, but he kind of became famous late, and so I think that was to his benefit.
He was a character actor.
Yeah, and he thinks like a storyteller. So it's a collaboration. I really feel lucky to get to work with him.
Can't wait to see it. Coming up, what relevance does a movie about the Civil Rights Act of the '60s hold in today's political climate? I'll ask Jay for his take on the current presidential race. The film is All the Way. We'll be right back. Our guest is Jay Roach, the brilliant director of so many wonderful films, funny and serious, and now All the Way. It premieres on HBO, an HBO original movie based on the stage play, which was a major hit. Bryan Cranston in it. The film centers around LBJ's efforts to get the Civil Rights Act passed. Is that history we should know more about?
I think so. It's
I bet a lot of young black protesters don't realize what Johnson did.
Well, it may be that people have forgotten, because of Vietnam and other things, how much Johnson cared about civil rights. Unfortunately, many of the issues in civil rights are still here with us. Who knew after all these years we would still be fighting for justice?
Voting rights, they're trying to kill that.
Voting rights, which I got to know so well in doing Recount in 2000. I'm very humbled by what's happened since then. I thought our film would trigger all kinds of voter reform, and because it was so much about purging voters and suppressing voting, making voting more difficult. Instead, in a way, it was almost like a training film, I feel like, for people to learn to manipulate the system by suppressing votes. It was really a painful reality.
With the study you did of him, and obviously you did research, how did he let himself get tangled in Vietnam?
It's a really interesting question. One of my heroes in journalism is Bill Moyers, and I got to talk to him about this he was there in the White House, obviously. And he said a very personal thing about Johnson, which I didn't know. There's an incredible story in our film about one of his closest aides, Walter Jenkins, who was gay and was caught 3 weeks before the election in '64.
In a bathroom.
And was in a bathroom at the YMCA. He'd actually been caught once before, and nobody knew. There was such a closeted life that Walter had to lead. And so he had to be fired, and Johnson distanced himself. This guy has been his closest friend since 1938, when he helped him win a seat in the House of Representatives, helps him in the Senate, helps him as a vice president, fires him 3 weeks before he's reelected. And Moyers said, I think he was so close to him, and he was such an important confidant. If he had kept him around, Vietnam might never have happened.
Bryan Cranston recently visited the White House, met with Obama, and the president credited Johnson's civil rights laws for ultimately leading the election of representatives who look like me. That's a great line.
Yeah.
Would you consider the film timely, given what's going on now in North Carolina with LGBT?
Absolutely. In fact, I just saw yesterday the Attorney General is suing the state using the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this very act that's passed during our film, because it included clauses on discrimination based on sex. It's a perpetual battle for civil rights. Whatever class gets sort of scapegoated as being the problem class that people decide to turn against. And it's unfortunate that you can't just pass an act and it just goes away. It takes years of battle at every level, and there is progress, as Dr. King said. The moral arc bends towards justice, but very slowly, and it's painful how slow sometimes.
You directed Game Change, about the McCain, Palin.
Yeah.
Some people think that it was Sarah Palin that led not only to Obama's 8 years, but might lead to Hillary's 8 years, that
Yeah.
she took down the Republican Party.
I subscribe to that philosophy to some extent. I think that Sarah Palin, in a way, paved the way for Trump. I think that someone could be so popular and so unprepared for the office she sought and still somehow be taken seriously, gave license for someone like Trump to think with no experience in politics. I mean, the comparison between someone like Trump and someone like LBJ with all his years of legislative experience, which actually led to him being a great president in those first 2 years at least, passing so much legislation that was good for Americans, all Americans. The difference is astonishing, and I think without Palin, that's part of what the story was about. Steve Schmidt, played by Woody Harrelson in the film, as he realizes what he's released, there's a tremendous amount of regret. Keep in mind that entire story is from the point of view of Republicans. There's hardly any Democrats in the story. So there is a sense of what have we done? What have we created? And that's what made that story worth telling.
What's your take on Trump?
I said something in one interview when we were releasing Trumbo. I just said, isn't wisdom a minimum basic requirement for leadership in our country? Do we think of Trump as a wise man? And that's what I look for in leaders, people who have wisdom and not ego. I think wisdom should be a much, much higher ranking virtue than ego and the ability to...
So how do you account for it?
I think there's a steady campaign from the right, primarily, to delegitimize government, to look at real hard-working civil servants as the enemy of what it means to be American. I think the popularity of politicians is low, partly because of some bad behavior by politicians, but it's very low also because there's a 24-hour-a-day campaign, a propaganda campaign to actually make government look like the problem and not the solution. So you're electing people who go into government thinking government is not functional, and then they make it dysfunctional, fulfill that prophecy, and then run on let's trash government. And that's, again, what this film, I hope, shows, is that people who believed in government could actually do good things. People who don't believe in government are never going to fulfill anything with that.
Next, I'll ask Jay about his new movie about Mark Felt, a.k.a. Deep Throat, who I interviewed. This is his only interview, I think. And we will play a game of If You Only Knew. Don't go away. Our guest is Jay Roach, the director of All the Way, stars Bryan Cranston as Lyndon Johnson. The film premieres May 21st on HBO, and it'll be shown probably throughout the year. Wendy McClendon Covey was here recently. She's going to play Mark Felt's wife, right? And she told me all about the fact that you were producing it, and I told you that I did that interview with him, which you ought to get from I will, CNN.
Yeah. I definitely will track it down. I think Diane Lane's actually playing Mark Felt's wife. I'm not sure which one she's playing. I'm not directing it.
Oh, no, Covey's playing his assistant.
Yeah, right? That's right.
Yeah. You're producing and not directing. Why?
Peter Landesman is directing. Peter wrote the screenplay. We developed it at Playtone. We worked for a few years on it, did a ton of research. And my schedule started stacking up at a time when he had found a way to get it made. And I said, you know what, go for it. He had a great vision.
You like producing?
I don't like it as much as directing, I'll be honest. But if I can help someone get something done that I believe in, it's actually enjoyable. And I learned we directors don't get to work with each other ever, so if you're a producer, then you're watching someone else and actually benefit from seeing what other people's sets are like.
Did you cast Liam Neeson?
No, Peter Landesman did.
Good casting.
Very good casting, and the look he's found for him is fantastic. I don't know if it's come out yet, so I won't talk too much about it, but he looks very much like Mark Felt.
When is it due?
I'm not sure. I don't know if they have a release date yet.
Is it HBO or?
No, it's a feature film. Yeah, it's with Ridley Scott's company and Mark Boutin and some other.
It'll take Liam out of the violence then, huh?
There's no action sequences.
No taken.
Yeah.
A follow-up on the story I hear that there's going to be an Austin Powers 4.
You know, we talk about it every time we get together, and it ebbs and flows, and I would say it's in a latent phase right now. But someday, if we find the right idea that seems to have it earn itself, for sure, I'd always be. You know, Mike gave me the break of a lifetime in letting me direct Austin 1, so I'm always good to go.
You have any ideas about what 4 would be like?
We've had a whole bunch. It's been, you know, many years of kicking around, and we've had so many, but there's no one that's kind of stuck yet.
We're going to play a follow-up a little here called a game called If You Only Knew. I just throw some questions at you.
Sure.
The director you most looked up to?
Woody Allen.
An actor or actress you'd like to work with?
Kate Blanchett.
Best thing about Hollywood?
Telling stories that help me cope with the perpetual anxiety dream of how is our civilization going to work out?
Worst thing about Hollywood?
The politics that kicks in because everything is so expensive.
Do you have a favorite film of all time?
I have a number of them. The Graduate, always Harold and Maude. I was a David Lynch fan for a long time, so I loved Eraserhead. It was a very weird reference. But Annie Hall is probably what convinced me to go into storytelling, because
Really?
I liked the way Woody Allen portrayed dysfunction as not necessarily being as serious. It was actually funny. You could make, human dysfunction, which I was feeling very dysfunctional at the time, feel like you could survive it and even learn to laugh at it.
What do you think of the way he works, though, a film a year?
Yeah, that's crazy. I did that for a while, and I just did it, but to do it as for as many years as he has, and just I admire anybody who finds a way to be that prolific and doesn't get involved in all the political shenanigans it takes to release films, to get them set up. I don't know how he does it.
Who's a young director that's impressed you?
Jason Moore is a really interesting director. I produced Sisters with him. He did with Tina Fey and Amy Poehler recently. He comes out of Broadway. He's a really, and I like Cary Fukunaga. Is that how? Am I saying it? Fukunaga, I think it's the guy who did True Detective and Beast of No Nations. That guy's amazing.
Something always makes you laugh.
That's a good one. What always makes me laugh is when a character believes something so completely different about themselves from what they really are. You know, in other words, I always laugh at people who think they're one thing and it couldn't be further from the truth. For example, Robert De Niro in Meet the Parents thinks he's the greatest spy, mole hunter, human lie detector on earth, and he gets every single thing wrong about Ben Stiller. So it's the difference between what you think about yourself and what's really true. Something
that really ticks you off?
Unfairness, and even petty unfairness. Just hold on, you call that ball out, and it was it. But especially systemic societal injustice. It's a weird obsession of mine. It's a lot of these films I work on now are about that.
What do you think you'd be doing if you weren't in the movie business?
I was pre-law in college, and I am so opinionated, and clearly driven to fight for certain, self-centered, I'm sure, opinions about things. I might have been a good lawyer.
Most embarrassing moment?
Oh boy, I'm trying to think of the most embarrassing. When I was directing Austin Powers 3, a lot of times when you're directing, you're walking backwards. And I'm always, sort of trying to explain what a shot is, and I stepped into the shark tank. And it was only a 4-foot tank, and the sharks were animatronic, so I was not in any danger. But the humiliation factor was very high.
What's your most cherished memory?
My mom reading to me. My mom was amazing. She had 4 kids at a very early age. I think by 25 she had 4 kids. And she read to us perpetually, and because she read to me, I had a little bit of a head start kind of in school, and I loved school, and I loved learning, and I've always loved stories. So my mom reading to me.
What's the derivation of the name Roach?
It's an Irish name. I had to go back to Ireland to figure that out, but it's a very common Irish name. And I used to think that they changed the spelling to an Americanized version because there are some people in Ireland that spell it R-O-C-H-E. But it's actually R-O-A-C-H. It's the name of a fish. So it's maybe it was a Celtic name or something from way back.
Next, we'll look at some of the other projects Jay has in the works, and Jay is going to ask me a question. So don't go away. Our guest is Jay Roach, All the Way. Premieres on HBO May 21st. Can't wait to see it. Some folks here have seen it and loved it. I'm sorry I missed the play. On this show, we've heard from several actors and actresses regarding pay equity in Hollywood. What's your take?
Oh, you know, I don't have a quick answer for that, but it's crazy that people aren't, you know, paid in an equal basis. There's a lot of old traditions, old ways of doing things that were inherited from the studio system, which has always been a very much an old boys network. And it's not just pay; it's the percentages of various groups that are very poorly represented, especially in directing. You know, we talk about it all the time in the Directors Guild, but all across the board. And it's ironic too because there are a fair number of women running studios now, but it just takes time, I guess. So yeah, it's something that people are working on, though. At least it's come to everybody's attention.
Lack of good roles for women?
I think that's a related issue. I think there's a misperception. It's changing. I mean, there's definitely a sense that it's quite commercial to shift to female points of view. My friend Paul Feig is doing Ghostbusters, and the smartest thing he ever did was just say, you know what, we're going to flip it to all women. And I'm seeing female-driven stories get much higher priority. So hopefully that's changing.
You doing a film with Bette Midler?
You know, we've been trying for a long time to get a TV show off the ground at HBO with Bette Midler about local casting directors. When you go to a tax break state like New Mexico or Louisiana, there's always a local casting director. They work with the casting director you bring in, but they cast all the people with like the 5 lines or less that get cast in the local town. But they represent a whole sort of stable of actors who have to go through them to get to the studio, and the studio has to go through them to get to the actors. So they become very important in their own minds. It's what I was saying. It's that thing. Sometimes they become sort of diva-like.
Is it going to happen?
I don't know. And I just thought, I don't know if you saw her one-woman play, I'll Eat You Last, about Sue Mangers.
Great.
It was unbelievable. Great. And I think she'd be amazing, but I don't know. It's kind of in a...
What's the status of a comedy starring Scarlett Johansson entitled The Psychopathic Test?
Yeah, that's actually a thriller, and it's going very well. Kristen Gore is writing the screenplay, and
are you directing?
I will direct that, and
it's a feature.
It's a feature film, and it's about something I'm fascinated with, is that there are many more psychopaths and sociopaths in our world. They don't have to be serial killers to get influence over us, you know, and a lot of them are running corporations and work in my business. And
the inmates are running the asylum.
And they are very often the most charismatic, fearless people, so they get promoted, and that's a really interesting
Bradley
story.
Cooper as Lance Armstrong?
You know, that sort of went away when Stephen Frears did the Lance Armstrong story with... spacing on the guy's name, but he kind of got out in front of us. But I do think that's still a great story because of the other guy whose story it was about was...
the other racer?
Yeah, Tyler Hamilton wrote a fantastic book. And so we still hope to try to put it together. We just have to change it up a little bit. Ben Foster was the actor who got the jump on us.
Is there a historical film that hasn't been made?
Oh, there are an infinite number. And... just recently, I said, "Oh, I really want to tell the Andrew Jackson story because what a fascinating." And somebody's doing that. Yeah, they're taking him off the bill
now.
Yeah, somebody's doing a miniseries. You know, I'll tell you one that I would love to do. We worked on it and tried to figure out how to do it. Is when Upton Sinclair ran for governor of California in 1934 as a socialist who became a Democrat, very much like Bernie. And he was so popular because of his muckraking books, The Jungle, that the right, including Hollywood studios, teamed up to smear him and hired the first ever private smear campaign propaganda house called Whitaker and Baxter. And there's a great article called The Lie Factory. So we want to tell that story of how they teamed up to bring down this socialist Democrat who was very popular at the time. He was up 4-1 in the polls, and then they switched it to being down 4-1, and he lost.
You ought to do a movie about Goebbels.
I have been working on a movie about Goebbels. Isn't it the beginning of propaganda?
The original propaganda.
The big lie and the
Tell it over
don't
and
tell
over
anybody.
again,
Oh wait, are
believe.
we on camera for a No, I think that's a horrible story and an amazing picture of how you can, convince people to do anything once you prey on their fears and their prejudices and their own innate tribalism. You can get them to do anything.
And then to kill your wife and your kids with
Yeah.
Ooh. You're married to Susanna Hoffs, huh?
Yes.
She's co-founder of the band The Bangles.
That's right, and sang a lot of their hits.
You have
I got
children?
very lucky. We met on a blind date. I have 2 amazing kids one's in college and one's in high school, yeah.
What do you want to ask me?
Well, I'm very interested in the idea of resiliency. I had to give a talk on it recently, which I had never thought about very much. So I wanted to ask you, what was you don't have to say your lowest, but what was one of your lowest points in your life, and how did you cope with it?
Well, I've had a lot of resilience. If I had to pick the lowest, I had occasion to have been falsely charged. It involved John F. Kennedy and money being distributed to Jim Garrison. Wow. A financier had given money to Jim Garrison. We were passing it along, and he said we stole it. We didn't steal it. The case was thrown out.
Yeah.
But that was a low point, and another low point was having a heart attack and bypass surgery. But I've always had a get up off the ground attitude. I can't believe that, like, I'm 82. Next May 1st, I'll be in the business 60 years.
You're one of the most resilient human beings on the planet. Yeah, for sure.
I guess you look up resilience, you get my picture.
Yeah, absolutely. But more than just saying get up off the ground, is there a way of life that you apply at that moment, or something you say to yourself? How do you?
I never give up. I never. I don't have faith in myself in many areas. Socially, I wasn't good at marriage till this one. It was down 19 years. But I never doubted my broadcast ability.
Yeah.
Because I always knew I could do this.
Yeah. That's incredible.
I knew I could do it.
Yeah. So confidence. Yeah.
You're a great guest, Jay.
Thank you. Great interview. Thank you.
You're a great director.
Thank you.
Thanks to Jay Roach. All the Way premieres May 21st on HBO. Remember, you can find me on Twitter at King's Things, and I'll see you next time.